would it be fair to say that you are like the voice of one crying in the wilderness at this time?
Well, it feels like that, certainly. I mean, actually, there are about 60 of us who are members of what's called the COVID recovery group, which is a ginger group who are opposed to lockdowns and deeply skeptical. But often enough, one finds that when you're making the voice call in the House of Commons, remember, when there's a division, the Speaker says, those that have that opinion say aye, and of the contrary, no. On several occasions, I've been the only no, the only voice crying no in the wilderness, as you say.
Unfortunately, there doesn't look like there's a messiah coming to save us. Sir Desmond, no offence, but you are one of the lone voices out there, and you're on our show, whereas the British public have yet to hear anybody provide a coherent or sensible strategy against the lockdowns. Why is that? Why is your voice not being heard across the mainstream media channels? Because if you turn on the BBC tonight, all you will hear is that everybody is supporting what is going on.
Yes, I'm told continually that opinion polls show that people have an even greater thirst for more intensive lockdowns. But I can't find these people. You know, I have a huge correspondence, and I can count the number of people who say that I've got this wrong and they really do want a fiercer lockdown and more restraints on their liberties and on their economic ability to make a living. As I say, I can count them on the fingers of one hand, as opposed to a huge correspondence of people who feel very differently. Now, of course, you know, that's not a statistically significant sample. But I really wonder what people are being asked or how they're being led by the questions in this opinion polling, which says everybody is very much in favour of the current strategy of more intensive and more prolonged lockdowns. Clearly, the mainstream media have decided to pursue what they regard as the majority view. I have been surprised. You know, people have sent me footage of some really quite unacceptable behaviour in the policing of anti-COVID demonstrations. And I'm very surprised that the mainstream media haven't picked up on any of these. They're only available on the internet. Why is the contrary view being so underrepresented on mainstream media? We're supposed to live in a democracy, and now democracy doesn't just mean rule by the majority. Democracy involves freedom of expression, freedom of worship, the ability, freedom of association. And I'm very, very surprised that the way the mainstream media has simply rolled over and failed to take account of what is clearly a significant minority. I accept that perhaps we are a minority, but nevertheless, in a democracy, we have a voice and it should be heard. And I certainly regard, even if it turns out, and I think, you know, clearly I'm not scientifically trained, although I have common sense and I have a certain amount of a skeptical approach. I think a skeptical approach in a politician is the right thing. A politician should challenge, should ask questions, even if they're uncomfortable questions. But if it turns out that my skepticism has been wrong at the end of this, and the scientific consensus in favour of lockdowns has been correct, and bear in mind, historians will pick over this for years to work out whether that's the case. Nevertheless, I think it was, even if I've been proved to be wrong, it's right that I should ask these questions, and it's right that I should challenge the consensus. That's an important role in a democracy, that minorities have a voice and it should be heard.
Very true. In relation to YouGov, they have produced a poll that indicates that 79% of people, which is up 8 percentage points, support these lockdowns. But It is what it is. But as you say, that would be the case that 21% don't. For many of us, when we look at what goes on in Parliament, taking aside the SNP, of course, and others, we basically see a one-party state just now in relation to COVID-19, in that the Labour Party are calling for tougher lockdowns, and then eventually the Conservative Party just kind of come along kicking and screaming. So the Prime Minister's set to address the nation again at 8 p.m. It looks like he's going to announce a full national lockdown. In Scotland, where I am, we are already into that. Again, though, but my question for you this time, Sir Desmond, and then I've got some more questions, is the last time this happened, there was a clear package of financial support set out. There was clear indications of how long this could last, how long this can do. There's none of that this time. It's you're going into lockdown and you'll just accept it.
Well, you're right to say kicking and screaming. Well, I'm glad to say that at least we're kicking and screaming against this. This is very, very difficult for Conservatives, whose basic philosophy is individual responsibility, and that individuals are much better at making choices for themselves, their families, and their communities than the state is making them for them. So the very notion of the state interfering in your intimate personal and economic life is anathema. So at least I'm glad that if ministers are going this way, I'm glad that they're kicking and screaming. I prefer that they actually implemented their principles and stood against it. But to coming specifically to your question, well, hold on a minute. We would expect, remember when we went into lockdown last time, we had to wait for the Chancellor's statement afterwards to see what additional measures there would be. But remember, he has already made clear that the furlough scheme, the bounce back loans and the C-bills, the main elements of the economic support, are in place at least until April. So we'll have to see if these are to be augmented in any way. But the basic building blocks are already in place.
But again, Sir Desmond, on that, the money that is going to be coming out is either being created by the Bank of England. You know, very few people talk about that. Quantitative easing by the Bank of England has increased by 300 billion in the last year, up to 750 billion. The debt of the UK stands well in excess now of 100% of GDP. I mean, this money that the Chancellor is giving out isn't real money. So how can anybody who is a fiscal conservative or an economic conservative say that this is sustainable? Because it's simply not.
Well, they're working on the presumption that interest rates will remain extremely low for the foreseeable future, and therefore that this is an affordable expedient for the short term. I take the view, as you do, that we are going to pay for this. You are going to have to pay for it over generations. There will be all sorts of things that we would very much like to have from public expenditure, not least increased spending on the NHS, which we are doing all this to protect, remember. The NHS will require a growing subvention of funds over years to come, and we'll be in the position of saying, I'm sorry, we can't afford it, because we are still repaying the debts for the huge increase in government expenditure that was afforded to get us through the COVID crisis. So I'm deeply concerned about this. Yes, we will pay for it one way or another. We'll pay for it in inflation, or we'll pay for it in taxes and repayment of borrowing.
Correct. And one question that somebody sent in, I thought was a really excellent question I would like to ask, is that why is it that SAGE has many behavioural psychologists and other non-clinical disciplines, but there isn't one single economist on SAGE that is alerting people to economic realities of these decisions?
My view is that's the role of politicians. You know, if you ask a scientist, let's forget the behavioural scientists. Let's talk about the clinicians, about those who are the expertise, have the expertise in virology and all the rest. If you ask them how you are going to stop the spread of a virus that spreads by human contact, do not be surprised if they say to you, you have to stop human contact, all human contact. And that's essentially the position we're in. It is for us, the politicians, to turn around and say, well, thank you very much for that advice, but it comes at too enormous economic a cost. It is for us to make the judgment. We're the elected politicians. It is not for Dr. Heinz Kiosk or whoever he may be to say, you must do X, and politicians jump. We have to assess the implications of what the scientists are telling us and come to a judgment as to what is the lesser of two evils, or some arrangement in the middle. And the danger is, at the moment, as I see it, the government ends up being bounced all the time. Just think what happened just before Christmas. Parliament had voted explicitly for certain arrangements to govern Christmas. The moment Parliament went down, the government was bounced by to being told, oh, there's a new variant of the virus that we've discovered. It's so much more infective. And unless you do what we tell you, thousands and thousands of more people will die, and it'll be you that are to blame. Now, consider yourself being a politician receiving that advice. You do not have the correct training and expertise and experience to be able to identify the correct questions to ask in order to verify whether these scientists are on the money or 100 miles from it. And I believe that what is clearly necessary is not that you have economists on stage, as you suggest. Rather, you have an alternative group of scientists who are there with a skeptical bent, particularly statisticians, who are able to arm politicians, at least with the right questions to ask in those circumstances, so that they're not in the position of being bounced at the last minute. Bear in mind, when that advice was given, that lobby, the SAGE lobby, and it is a lobby, had already made clear their frustration that their earlier strictures about Christmas had not been fully implemented. You know, they have form.
But so Desmond, as well, the issue that I have, and many of us have, is that nobody elected Chris Whitty or Patrick Vallance to run this country. We elected our politicians, and you are entirely right in what you say. Yet, likewise, nobody elected Piers Morgan to run this country or the BBC to run this country. Yet, we have been very sceptical from this from the very, very start. But you're not allowed to question the BBC. If you question Patrick Vallance or Chris Whitty, you're a conspiracy theorist. I mean, from we and the alternative media and everyone, there has never been such a brutal suppression of free speech, of alternative voices, as you say as well, Sir Desmond, about the policing of these protests. You know, anybody with an inquisitive brain has either been shut down or they've been maligned and they've been attacked, which kind of makes a lot of us, Sir Desmond, go down a wee bit deeper a rabbit hole and say to ourselves, is there something deeper at play? The World Economic Forum have spoken extensively about what is called the Great Reset. They have spoken about new things. Now, I don't deny COVID-19 exists and is extremely serious, but is it not the case that extremely nefarious individuals, people with agendas, are using this to push certain agendas?
Well, there may well be. And I don't doubt that there are people pushing their agendas, but I'm confident that the government is being pushed about by a scientific lobby that clearly believes that there is, you know, I don't dispute that those people who are advocating, for the vast majority, are advocating the current strategy, do it because they genuinely believe that it's the only way to stamp out what they believe is a virus that will overwhelm the NHS. I'm certain of that. Behind them, there will be all sorts of other people with other agendas. But I'm confident that the main question is, are they right in their assessment of this virus. And my job as a politician, elected politician, as I see it, is to hold the government to account and to question them. Let me be clear. I am opposed in principle to the measures that the government has taken. I believe that the government has no place in telling us who we may meet, when we may meet them, where we may meet them, and what we must wear when we meet them. So I'm against this in principle. But at least I could be persuaded that there was some rationale to it if I thought that it was working. Manifestly, it isn't.
True. That's very well. Again, but this is the other thing, Sir Desmond. I'm old enough to remember when back in February and March, Chris Whitty said that people don't need to get overly alarmed. We had a different strategy in this country. We were not pursuing the lockdown model. The lockdown model has come out of China. And another individual I'm interested to know your opinion on is Neil Ferguson of Imperial College. Neil Ferguson has been wrong about nearly everything in all his predictions. Swine flu, bird flu, and on this as well. Yet Neil Ferguson, who broke his own rules that he wanted to bring in, admitted to breaking his rules. He is now again in a senior position advising the government. I mean, you wonder why people like us can't believe what's going on.
Well, I did raise this in the debate last Wednesday. I asked for reassurance that he was no longer guiding government policy. I didn't get it significantly from the minister on the Treasury bench. But nevertheless, you're absolutely right. We were not planning any kind of lockdown. I remember the briefing that I was given about the government strategy. And then we got the Imperial College scenario of 250,000 deaths, and the government was bounced, frightened, into declaring for a lockdown because they did not want the finger being pointed at them that all these deaths would be at their door. As I say, what they didn't have was a body of scientists capable of arming them with the right questions to ask. And certainly, from my point of view, to rubbish the prognosis that had been given. And I think that's just what's happened in the last few days. We've been told all about new modelling on a new variant, and everybody's going to die and it'll be your fault. And if you're a politician being told that, you really do need to have access to some other body of expertise to say, hold on a minute, what about X, Y, and Z? How did you work out A, B, and C? Where is your modelling in effect of, all sorts of other criteria? And we haven't got that. There is no alternative voice available to ministers at the moment. And that is a great failing in the system for not having put that in place.
But, Sir Desmond, this is all fine just now. And look, I'm not criticising you. We are big favour of you, and everything that you say is brilliant. But for me, as an individual, for our audience, we are exasperated that you are the only real voice in that whole chamber. I mean, how bad is the calibre of politicians? How bad is the calibre of mainstream media journalists? And as we said as well, yes, it's terrible that people will lose their lives as a result of this virus. But what would happen if, for example, we were ever in a state of war and politicians had to deal with mass casualties? Would we just surrender so that people didn't have? How are we ever going to get back to normal when, as you're basically saying, our political class are too weak to stand up to the media, to the lobby that is advising them? How can we ever get back to normal?
Well, I think ultimately, I mean, so let me just first of all address the lone voice. Remember, the last vote that we took, the last recorded vote that we took on coronavirus regulations, over 70 of us voted against. So I'm not the lone voice. There's Mark Harper, there's Charles Walker, Sir Graham Brady, and many others who are making the case. But in a democracy, we have an elected parliament, and you have the debate, and there's a vote, and we lost. And hey, that's democracy. But at least we had the opportunity to make the argument and to make the case with free speech in Parliament. That was not the case until the early autumn, when throughout the summer, the government used existing powers that it had from the 1984 Public Health Act. Didn't George Orwell choose the title of that dystopian novel very, very presciently? Using those powers, they simply made the regulation without debate or vote in Parliament. We've changed that now. The government has at least accepted that it needs to bring Parliament back to debate the measures and implement them. And that's what's going to happen on Thursday. Now, we know what will happen. The government has a majority and Labour are going to vote with the government. And so we'll end up losing. But all you can do in a democracy is simply make the argument and argue till you're blue in the face. And at some stage, the truth will out. But the truth will prevail.
But the problem is, Sir Desmond, as well, for the masses, they have never been exposed to an alternative argument. When people turn on the BBC, ITV, Sky, and even on social media, people who are controversial have been completely silenced. However, they've been totally removed from social media. So you're in a position of Soviet-style propaganda here, where you have the BBC as the uber broadcaster saying that this is the truth. So how would it be possible that even people would know there is an alternative voice to this? As I say, the majority of people don't know who you are, so sadly, and don't know what you're doing. They won't have heard of Peter Hitchens. They won't have heard of the Great Barrington Declaration. And that to me is frightening, because even if I believe something, a healthy democracy, a healthy society works on debate and analysis of issues, not just diktats.
Well, you're right. And it's shocking to me that the mainstream media do not pick up on the opposition. But to be fair, I mean, I'm constantly having invitations to be interviewed. And my speeches have also been played on the Today programme, my questions in Parliament. So you're right that the overwhelming force of the broadcast media is in favour of the government's position and strategy. But it's not as if I've been completely excluded and those who think like me, you know. So I do see those spokesmen, from my point of view, actually out on the airwaves, admittedly, in much smaller numbers than and with less force than the opposition, the proposition is afforded. But nevertheless, we aren't completely silenced.
I want to try and draw things to a conclusion, because I know you'll be very, very busy, Sir Desmond, and this has been fantastic. How will this all end? Because we're going into another national lockdown. It is, people's mental health is struggling. How and when will this end? You know, because I'm old enough as well to remember that supposedly a vaccine came out a few weeks ago that was going to be the answer to everything. Now that's been poo-pooed. When will this end?
Well, I think I'm still very hopeful that the vaccine will be the end of it. But clearly it's not going to be a quick end. If the vaccine doesn't prove to be the panacea to all this, then I think, the public will no longer tolerate the consequences of continual lockdown, not least the economic consequences, because let's face it, the Chancellor isn't going to be able to carry on with the measures that he's put in place beyond the spring. So reality, economic reality will bite, and we'll have to say, look, this is a disease that, although very nasty, only kills predominantly, overwhelmingly, only kills people who have specific comorbidities, and the rest of us have got to get on with ordinary life. But my own optimism is based on, let's all get this jab as quickly as possible. Frankly, I've no objection to it at all. I'd be the first in the queue. And to be fair, overwhelmingly, my correspondence is not from anti-vaxxers. It's from people saying why they should get it first.
I think on the issue of the vaccine, the problem a lot of people have is they are just concerned about the speed with which it has been introduced. Likewise, there is a trust issue. There is a trust issue of the scientists. There is a trust issue of the mainstream media. And again, let's be honest, the way in which the vaccine was rolled out was nothing but propaganda. I often say on the show, if a family came over from North Korea and turned on the BBC, they would be appalled at the level of propaganda that they witness when you see clapping. I mean, this is the thing, Sir Desmond. Look, if you think that's fine, we can see through the way that we are patronised, the way that we are being lied to and silenced. And that is what is really frustrating. And that's where it is. A lot of people just don't trust anyone now. And that's where so many of these theories come from.
Yes, well, I understand that. And that's why I think that the government needs to be much more careful in its information war in order not to build up any additional mistrust. And I think the best way to have done the vaccine would have been to have lined up the cabinet and their loved ones. Mm-hmm. Remember when John Gummer made the BSE crisis had his children tucking into beef burgers? That's the way to do it. Line up all the politicians with their loved ones to have the vaccine first. That would have been a much better way of overcoming people's skepticisms, to see that, if we believe it's safe, and that there are no adverse...
Then you have Professor Van Tam, who said that, but social distancing will still exist, face masks will still exist. Anyway, Sir Desmond, I will let you go because you've overrun your time. Thank you very much for coming on the show, and I would be honoured if you were able to come on again. But all I would say is that we really admire the work that you're doing and being a voice for us in Parliament, alternative. But all I would say is people aren't as stupid as the mainstream media and the government likes to think. They like to think that we are stupid. And it was the same with Brexit, that I know you were a supporter of. That, you idiot plebs, you won't dare vote for Brexit. You won't do this. And frankly, there will reach a point where people will just turn around and say, look, we're not going to have a revolution in the French style because that's not us. But increasingly, all the bright people that can actually make a difference in this country, they'll just turn their back on the system and everything because they don't see it working for them.
I'm alive to that concern.
Good man. Sir Desmond.
I recognise that we have to save our democracy.
We do. And get people thinking and not creating a tribe of sheep. Sir Desmond, how can people follow you? What's the best way to keep in touch? Is it on Twitter?
Twitter and Facebook.
Brilliant. Good man, Sir Desmond. Enjoy the rest of your evening and keep up the good fight, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. That was absolutely fantastic.